I think what I want to do tonight is take a little trip to a place called Antarctica and check out the ice sheet. Some people say doesn't exist. Well, maybe if we're allowed to like travel to Antarctica, we can like confirm or deny the existence of said ice sheet. I mean, that'd be nice. You're allowed to go so many places in this world. You can you can even climb to the top of Mount Everest, which is so high, in fact, that if you die up there, they just leave your ass up there. You guys know that, right? There's like dead people strewn all over like Mount Everest, just like frozen and stuff. They let people just they let morons go up to Mount Everest every year and just die. Like no, everyone's okay with that. That's fine. They let people explore all kinds of places. You can go to the Amazon. You can invade these tribes that like are untouched by man. Apparently, nobody has, untouched by modern man. Nobody has a problem with that. Apparently, but for some reason, you can't go to Antarctica, which is weird. I don't know. You think that would be the one place you can go to? Who are you going to disturb there? Just a bunch of snow. Oh, that's right. There's a few penguins that kind of swim from South America stuff to Antarctica. Guys, there's no like wildlife in Antarctica, right? It's not like there's like polar bears and stuff like up north. But you can't go there. Kind of weird. Now, some people can go there. Like if you're like in the military, and if your name is Admiral Richard Byrd, you can go there on expeditions. Let's take a little trip to the ice wall. And more importantly, let's talk about one Admiral Richard Evelyn Byrd. How many of us know about Admiral Byrd? That's not a new name to a lot of us, of course, but how much do we really know about him? Do you know he made many expeditions to Antarctica, like many throughout his life? Did you also know that he's kind of connected to like elite people? Like he knew people. He's not just some guy. Because you might be thinking, well, I want to go to Antarctica too. Maybe I could become like an admiral and they'll send me on expeditions. Well, it doesn't really work like that. You kind of have to be in the club. They don't just like let you do stuff like that. It's not like all willy-nilly. Who is Admiral Richard Evelyn Byrd Jr., born October 25th, 1888, died March 11th, 1957. He was an American naval officer. He was a pioneering American aviator, polar explorer, and organizer of polar logistics. Aircraft flights in which he served as a navigator and expedition leader crossed the Atlantic Ocean, a segment of the Arctic Ocean, a segment of the Antarctic Plateau. So this guy was really doing it. All right. Richard Byrd said that his expeditions had been the first to reach both the North Pole and the supposed South Pole by air. His belief that he reached the North Pole is disputed. All right.
It's time for the Longines Chronoscope, a television journal of the important issues of the hour, brought to you every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Good evening. This is Frank Knight. Our very distinguished guest for this evening is Admiral Richard E. Byrd.
I must say that Admiral Byrd, our guest tonight, is not only our greatest living explorer, but he's been an inspiration to countless Americans. Admiral Byrd, you've been to both the North Pole and the South Pole. Admiral Byrd, may I ask you, is there a great difference between the top of the world and the bottom of the world?
There is. Now, the North Pole is the center of an ocean 10,000 feet deep. The South Pole, the center of a plateau, 10,000 feet high.
Interesting. The South Pole is a plateau 10,000 feet high. That's weird that the North Pole would be basically an ocean. Like he said, that's like 10,000 feet deep. And then the South, quote unquote, pole is a plateau. That's weird how that happened. Is that just by accident? Or maybe there is no South Pole. Maybe what we call south is just any direction away from north. And this plateau is maybe what kind of keeps the oceans in. It would make sense to me if you have these large oceans, they need to be contained. I mean, I know science tells you they don't really need containment. They could just like stick to balls and stuff that are spinning faster than the speed of sound at the equator. I mean, I know they tell you that, but we know that's not real. You know why it's not real? Because it's physically impossible. So it kind of makes sense to me that if we have these big old oceans, they would need a container. Like I have a pool, like in my backyard, and there's a container, keeps the water in. Seems logical. I'm drinking tea right now. This mug is basically a container for the liquid in the mug. But it would make sense that the oceans would need a container, and a big one. So why not a 10,000 foot high container called Antarctica? I'm just saying. Well, let me continue. I'm sorry.
The North Polar Sea is surrounded by continents that are slightly frozen. The Antarctic continent is surrounded by a belt of ice, frozen seas of at least 1,200 miles thick. Now, the south...
1,200 miles of frozen sea ice. That's how cold it is in Antarctica, by the way. And I want you guys to understand this. That, you know, they tell you that there's a North Pole and the South Pole. And, you know, by logic, you would think they'd be relatively similar, right? You'd think they'd be relatively similar because, you know, why not? They're symmetrical, and there's a tilt, and the tilt is, you know, as it moves and change from, say, northern summer to northern winter and then back, this tilt is compensated for due to the way we supposedly ellipse around the sun. You would think that the south region would be very similar to the northern region, but it turns out it's not. It turns out it's much colder in the south, in so-called Antarctica, like much colder, like to the point where there's no trees. And like I said, there's nothing could live there. No polar bears, no seals and things. It's, like I said, you maybe have some penguins that struggle to make it down there. But other than that, there's not much going on. I'm just saying.
South is a plateau. It gets in some places 14,000 feet up. I've been over areas about 13,000. And it's a little bit chilly up there.
Well, thank you very much, Admiral Byrd. It's been a great pleasure to have you here tonight.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Yeah.
The opinions expressed on the Longines Chronoscope were those of the speakers. The editorial board for this edition of the Longines Chronoscope was Larry Lasser and Kenneth Crawford. Our distinguished guest was Admiral Richard E. Byrd.
First of all, look at the clock in the background. I'm just saying, everybody. Look at the clock in the background. Yeah, it's the Gleason's map, everybody. It just is. This is how you tell people stuff without telling people stuff. Tell me the Earth's flat without telling me the Earth's flat. How's this? We'll do an interview where you basically tell me that there's more land beyond the South Pole. How does that work? And then we'll put a flat Earth map right in the back, right in the background. Oh man, you can't write this shit. That's right. It's the Gleason's map.
On this expedition, we hope to fly across the South Pole into the mysterious land beyond to see what is there. To the cameramen who made this picture, I want to give full credit. They did not hesitate to risk their lives at their job. Now, the North Pole is the center of a deep ocean, whereas the South Pole is the center of a high plateau, which averages 7,000 or 8,000 feet in altitude. There is no life whatever beyond the...
Guys, you know how high that is, right? It's the plateau averages like 7,000 or 8,000 feet. That's high. That's over a mile above sea level. What other continents are that high? It's the highest quote unquote continent. And it's also potentially the perimeter of this world. Potentially. You think that's a coincidence?
On the edge of the world. It is cold and silent.
The edge of the world. Is there an edge of a world in the bottom of a ball? Does a ball have an edge? And I'm not saying, no, you can fall off. You can fall off. He's basically saying it's the edge of our known world.
Silent and dead. There are no Eskimos. It is too cold for human beings to live there permanently.
He just said what I said previously. There's no Eskimo. It's too cold for people to live there permanently. That's why, like I said, if we lived on a ball that's symmetrical, that's tilted a certain way, but relatively as it tilts and moves in its orbit around the sun, you should really have no difference. The North and South poles should be analogous to each other. The South Pole shouldn't be so different. It turns out it is.
When we left on this expedition, we were, to put it very mildly, extremely anxious to find out if it still existed, would we be able to find it? And that was the great question. We left on this expedition from the Navy Yard at Boston. Here is our supply ship, the Rupert, just a big unprotected iron ship of 8,000 tons. Here is our icebreaker, the Bear, which we took as a protection for the personnel of the Rupert, and also to use exploring in dangerous ice areas. We took with us this time 150 Eskimo dogs, and more than 14,000 different kinds of items.
They took 150 dogs with them. I mean, that's some serious exploration, man. You're going down there with dogs, 150 dogs on a boat. That's tough to handle. This is wild. And by the way, this wasn't his first time down there. He was down there multiple times. He did, in 1926, he did a North Pole flight. He flew to the North Pole in 1926. And his first Antarctic expedition was in 1928. The one we're seeing now is after the war, some 20 years later. So the footage you're seeing now was multiple expeditions into his career. And again, his first one, he was down there in 1928. And he went down there with 2 ships and 3 airplanes. So this is wild. His second expedition was in 1933 to 1934. And he spent 5 months alone in a meteorological station at a base down there, where he apparently almost died from carbon monoxide poisoning, which I find interesting. Then he did he did his third expedition in 1939 to 1940. And this was the first one that was financed and conducted by the United States government. So interestingly enough, his first 2 expeditions to Antarctica were private. I want you to realize that. He went down there privately before World War II. Now remember, this is before the Antarctic Treaty, which apparently was signed in like 1959 by all the major countries of the world, et cetera, et cetera. We find him doing 2 expeditions before the U.S. government financed it. So who was financing it? How did he get there? Well, let's go back a little bit into his history, who he is, because like I said, they're not just going to let some plebe head down to Antarctica twice privately. Who was he? Let's get into it. His family. Byrd was born in Winchester, Virginia, the son of Esther Boiling and Richard Evelyn Byrd Sr. He was a descendant of the first families of Virginia. Well, here we go. He's a descendant of the first people here. His ancestors include planter John Rolfe and his wife Pocahontas. William Byrd II of Westover Plantation, who established Richmond, as well as William Byrd and Robert King Carter, a colonel governor. He was also descended from a bunch of other people that were, big wigs. And here's of note, he was the brother of Virginia Governor and U.S. Senator Harry F. Byrd, a dominant figure in the Virginia Democratic Party from the 1920s to the 1960s. All right, so his brother was the governor of Virginia and a U.S. senator. Now, we know, everyone, what it takes to be a U.S. senator. It's not like the House of Representatives. Hey, guys, I could probably make it to the House of Representatives if I really tried at some point. If I tried now, within 5 years, you might see me in the House of Representatives. But to be a senator, there's only 2 from each state. And especially in the early 1900s, his brother was a governor and a senator. Richard Byrd was a somebody. When you're a somebody and your brother is a governor and a senator, that means you're basically an initiate in one of their schools. Plain and simple. 100%, I'd bet anything on it. Very likely Masonic. How Richard Byrd got to go down to Antarctica twice, privately funded? Well, like I said, he wasn't a nobody.
Items for 2 years away from civilization, where there were no supply depots around the corner. Day followed day, week followed week, as we penetrated the great Pacific. And here we have an ordinary, unprotected iron ship, sailing in seas no ship had ever been in before since the world began. It wasn't that we were any better than our predecessors. We simply had a more open ice here. We bucked the ice till we were finally stopped by an impossible pack. Impossible, at least, for the Rupert. But we wanted to see what was beyond the horizon. That's what we came for. And for that purpose, we had another string to our bow, aviation. We retreated a few miles and managed to find an open lake in the ice field. So we proceeded to put the plane overboard. We had to execute this maneuver as rapidly as possible because we knew that under the influence of the wind and the tide, the fields would soon close in around the ship again. In fact, the ice is already beginning to close in. Our plan was to go south with our steamer until we were stopped by ice, and to take up the attack on the unknown with aviation. And now at last we're going to find out what was in the southern part of this mysterious part of the world. For after battling the bad weather, here we are 240 miles within it.
So just for reference, the footage we're seeing here was from his 4th expedition. So like I said, he did 3 prior. His 3rd one was finally financed by the government. Then he went to World War II. Obviously achieved a bunch of accommodations, of course. And now what we're watching is called, this expedition was called Operation Highjump. And it took place in 1946 and it ended in 47, right after the war. Which I want you all to think about this. The war ended, World War II, and right away, immediately, the United States military set its sights on Antarctica. Immediately. They didn't wait a couple years. They didn't let the boys come home. They immediately went to Antarctica. Why? That's the question. Why? To what? Are they going to say it was like almost like analogous to a space race? They needed to set up like what in Antarctica? You can't really maintain anything down there other than like small bases that require a lot of effort, a lot of resources. As he said, humans can't really live down here. It's not inhabitable. Why did the United States run to Antarctica right after World War II? Let's talk about it. What do we know about the Germans, the so-called National Socialist Party? Mean Mr. Mustache, his connection with the Tool Society and the Vril. We know they were very interested in Antarctica. Very interested. Why? We also know that after World War II ended, many of the Nazis ended up migrating and moving to, guess where? South America, Argentina. Guess what country is just a hop, skip, and a jump away from Antarctica? That's right, Argentina. The South Americas. If you want to get to Antarctica, that's the place to start. Why did all the Nazis basically go as close to Antarctica as you can? Why were they so interested during the war? I want you all to think about this. To the ramp up to the war, when Hitler was basically rising to prominence and fame during the 1930s, when he was basically consolidating his power, and then even during the war, significant German and Nazi resources, military and otherwise, were dedicated to Antarctica and Antarctic expeditions. Why? And then again, why as soon as the war ended, the U.S. went right to Antarctica? You see the effort they're putting in here. And he only mentioned 2 boats. And I'm going to read, they put way more than what they just told you here. 150 dogs, Alaskan sled dogs. That's crazy, right? Just that's crazy. That's insane. Why would you do that to the dogs? How do you think those dogs, don't even get me started on the dogs. So, like I said, Operation Highjump, 1946 to 1947. Secretary of Navy James Forstall appointed Byrd as officer in charge of Antarctic developments projects. And again, like I said, this was Byrd's 4th Antarctic expedition, was codenamed Operation Highjump. It was the largest to date. It was supported by a large naval force. I'm going to repeat it, a large naval force. 13 U.S. Navy support ships, besides the flagship USS Mount Olympus and the aircraft carrier USS Philippine Sea. 6 helicopters, which I don't know, how good a helicopter would be down there. 6 flying boats. 6 flying boats. 2 seaplane tenders and 15 other aircraft were used. The total number of personnel involved was over 4,000. Right after the war ends, you send 4,000 Navy men down to Antarctica. You don't even let them go home. What are we talking about here? Here's my point. Why the effort? Why the resources to Antarctica so soon after a major war? Something's going on in Antarctica.
We came to this strange phenomenon, ice islands. This was a strange and weird sea. Steaming through these ice islands was an eerie sensation. Here was the twilight of the gods, and we were curious to know what these somber giants were guarding. At long last, the dice fell our way, for the elements acted in our favor, The wind and the tide which had closed the ice in around us finally opened the pack so that we could break our way into more open sea. We had added nearly 500,000 square miles to the Pacific Ocean. And here is our journey's end. At length we sighted that great natural phenomenon, the ice barrier.
We saw that at last we saw that great natural phenomena, the ice barrier. Look at it. Like I said, that's not even apparently the land that is 10,000 feet above sea level. That's the ice barrier, which is right there at sea level. Look at that.
Southward ho! The start of one of Admiral Byrd's 6 expeditions. Later, Byrd charts the course as the ship, her masts outlined against a scarred ice wall, nears the end of a 14,000-mile journey. The sea is strewn with loose, broken ice, but the sturdy ship crunches steadily on to her improvised berth against the ice barrier.
They pushed on, right up to the ice barrier.
At length we sighted that great natural phenomenon, the ice barrier.
The ice barrier.
In 1955, 2 years before his death, Admiral Richard Byrd departs on his 5th and last expedition. But it's not simply an unknown continent or a distant ocean that lures adventurers like Richard Byrd. As he put it, here is a door ajar through which one may escape from the noise and chaos of civilization into the solace and harmony of the cosmos, and for a moment be part of it.
A door ajar through which one may escape into the cosmos. They love to tell you without telling you. A door to escape. Land beyond? Which is interesting. So we may have actually been watching footage from his last operation. So this footage that we just saw may not have been the 1946 Operation Highjump. It may have indeed been his last one, called Operation Deep Freeze, which was 1955. And apparently that one was part of a multinational collaboration. And he was the officer in charge, again, of Operation Deep Freeze. And it was his last trip to Antarctica. I don't know. So I'd have to look to see, indeed, whichever one it was. But this was definitely post-World War II. But either way, fascinating. Especially that last part about escaping the world. Basically the chaos of this world through a door in Antarctica into the cosmos.